Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to be taking a retrospective look at the entire first wave of Transformers Legacy by ranking them all worst to best. Now, when it comes down to this line, I think it's pretty safe to say that the vast majority of us are rather diverse. Half of us appear to really enjoy the direction that Hasbro are taking the main line, and then the other half of us just kind of feel as if though this line so far has been rather lackluster, especially when in comparison to some of the amazing figures that we saw throughout the War for Cybertron trilogy, a line of which was incredibly consistent. I actually think that in regards to the first wave of Legacy, it's really inconsistent. Half of the figures are very well done, whereas the other half kind of remind me of some of the entries that perhaps we would have seen for the Prime Wars trilogy. Now, in today's video, not only shall I be ranking them all from worst to best, but I'll also be giving you guys my thoughts on what I think has worked so far and what I hope to see perhaps improved for future waves. And I've also decided to include both the Kingdom Voyager Blaster as well as Core Hot Rod into this ranking, just as sadly they had a very limited release towards the tail end of Kingdom, meaning that the first wave of Legacy really was the best way for many collectors to actually get those guys into the collection. So we may as well kickstart this list with my least favourite Legacy figure so far, and as many of you guys guessed, it has got to go to the Core class Skywarp. I was so let down by this figure. As many of you know, I regard the Core Starscream as probably being one of the best Core figures that we've seen throughout that entire scale point so far, but Thundercracker just massively dropped the ball. In regards to a colour scheme, it looks fantastic. A really awesome Reed's Echo. The black, purple and silver complement each other so nicely, but where Hasbro massively missed the mark would be in regards to accessories. They failed to include the Seeker's signature null rays, and to me at least, that's like giving us a G1 version of Megatron and not including the fusion cannon. You just cannot do that. It just makes no sense, and what adds even further insult to injury is that the Core Starscream actually included his null rays, meaning that Skywarp does sadly stick out like a sore thumb, and the accessory that they gave in order to kind of subsidize the null rays was basically pointless. It was this Cybertronian taser, which when you don't have it combined with some of the other core weapons, looks completely ridiculous. The only way that I think this kind of entry can be redeemed is if when Hasbro do get round to eventually releasing Thundercracker, they package in an additional pair of null rays. However, the chances of them doing that I think are incredibly unlikely, meaning that Thundercracker is always going to look out of place unless a third party company as always comes in and saves the day. And then we move on to the 9th spot. Sadly, it's once again another core release. I'm not hating on the core line at all. You guys all know that I actually really love it. It is by far one of my favourite entries into kind of the War for Cybertron trilogy that we saw, but this Core Hot Rod I just thought, when in comparison to some of the other core releases that came before it, was a massive step in the wrong direction in regards to quality. It really did remind me of some of the earlier legend scaled figures that we used to see back in the day. The proportions were just way off, the forearms were way too small and way too stubby, he had so much kibble packed onto the legs. The QC weren't that great either. I actually found the tolerances on this guy to be incredibly loose and floppy, and just overall it looks really disproportionate. And when you actually compare it to some of the other core offerings that we've seen, such as say Soundwave, Megatron or Optimus Prime, it really doesn't look the best. So sadly, Core Hot Rod I think forever will find himself on the lower end of the list, unless maybe there is an even worse core class figure that will come out in the future, of which I'm hoping never happens, as so far, as mentioned previously, the vast majority of the figures have all been really well done. And taking the 8th spot is in fact kind of our first proper mainline entry into Legacy, and it was the first Legacy review I actually did for Wave 1, that being the Legacy Deluxe Class Skids. My goodness, I think it's safe to say that in regards to expectations, when I took a look at this guy over on the channel, my overall hype for this line just plummeted to an all-time low. This was a massive step backwards from the quality that we had seen from the previous War for Cybertron Deluxe figures. So we'll start off firstly with one of my major issues with this guy, just the design. The design I think is awful. The proportions I think are incredibly off. He's got this really weird angle to his forearms. I hate the fact that he's got that block permanently attached to the back of his head. He's got some of the worst waffling slash hollowness that I've seen on a mainline figure since literally the Power of the Primes, the Prime Wars trilogy line. The hollowness that is in the thighs and the actual inside of the legs is horrific, and the actual knee cut itself is super ugly. When I actually got this guy, I was praying that the rest of the deluxe assortment wasn't as bad as he was, and luckily they weren't. The vast majority of them, they're all pretty well done, but Skids, he's got to be one of the worst mainline figures that I've reviewed so far over on the channel. The only redeeming factor to him would be the paint. I think that in regards to the actual colour scheme, it looks really nicely done. The vehicle mode isn't too bad, but still, much like bot mode, I definitely do think there are some proportion issues where that is concerned. And as mentioned previously, it just, to me, felt like a step backwards. Then we turn it to spot number 7, and it had to be given to the Legacy Prime Universe RC. Now, I think I speak for the vast majority of us that when leaked listings began to circulate that we were going to be seeing Prime characters introduced into Legacy, our expectations were absolutely through the roof. I was so excited to see Transformers Prime characters back on shelves in a brand new mainline. I was expecting something very similar to the likes of Thrilling 30, where they'd be taking characters from all different universes and giving us updated representations of how those characters appeared in their respected shows. But basically all they were going to be doing would be taking essence from that original design and giving us an almost G1 stylization, which on paper actually sounds really interesting. And to be honest, another figure that we'll be discussing slightly higher up on the list, I think executed this really nicely. But RC, there's just something about her of which I just am not a big fan of. Now, if we set the whole Transformers Prime element off to the side, just as an actual figure herself, I'm not a big fan of the placement of the wheels where the legs are concerned. To me, it looks really ugly, kind of reminds me once more of some of those Prime Wars trilogy characters. Her accessories, I think, are rubbish. She comes with 2 Energon blades, which do not resemble anything like we saw from the original Prime show, and as far as actual blades are concerned, they're ridiculous. They're just these half semicircles. They've got really and truly no surface detail to them. I just really don't like the way they look. They gave you the option that you could remove the front tire to become this almost drone slash shield. Once again, really pointless accessory. I would have much rather a proper weapon with the likes of, say, Kickback and even Skids to an extent. Despite them including Energon infused weapons, they also came with more traditional G1 solid plastic weapons, and I would have loved to have seen the same here for RC. Had they included a proper rendition of her blaster, I think that it massively could have changed my thoughts on the figure. But as it stands, I think the accessories are really letting her down. I don't think the overall shape of the body looks that great either. It's incredibly bulky and blocky when in comparison to, say, even the Earthrise RC and Elita 1. Despite those being feminine in design and all based on kind of their G1 appearance, they've all got this really kind of slender nature to them, whereas this RC is just super bulky, super blocky. I put that down to the simple fact that I believe they have intentions to use this mold later on, so they've kind of made it neutral in terms of design so that it's not specifically for Transformers Prime RC. I guess we'll just have to wait and see how the inevitable repaints actually turn out. But for me, just as far as the design is concerned, I'm not a massive fan of her at all. I think her transformation is pretty interesting. The articulation has got to be some of the best I've ever seen for an RC figure, and the bike mode actually is pretty cool, but it's really that robot mode where sadly I think they dropped the ball. And then we turn to 6th place, and this is where the line really begins to pick up in my opinion. We've got to give this spot to the Legacy Kickback. Oh my goodness, I've wanted updated deluxe scale Insecticons forever, and finally here in Legacy they gave us just that. This is undoubtedly the best official version of Kickback that we've ever seen, and the reasoning behind why he's ranked slightly lower on the list is just because some of the other figures that we'll be discussing are so well done and definitely are more along the lines of the War for Cybertron trilogy. This Kickback looks awesome. The attention to detail is fantastic. A real true to form version of Kickback as he actually appeared in the G1 show. I think the accessories were awesome. He came with this really cool G1 inspired gun as well as 2 Energon spike blades. I think that's perfect. Really nice accessories. Paintwork on this guy was flawless. Articulation also was exceptional, and the actual Insecticon mode itself, whilst very simplistic to get to it, I think looks incredibly accurate to how it actually appeared on the show. Sadly, at the time of this recording, there are no rumours that we could in fact actually be seeing the rest of the Insecticons in future Legacy waves, so I'm kind of putting my bet on maybe store exclusives or online exclusives to see Scrapnel and Bombshell. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, but this Kickback is really cool, and it definitely makes me super hyped for the other 2 remaining Insecticons. Then we turn to a core class figure. As mentioned previously, Skywarp and Hot Rod weren't just on the lower end of the list because they were the cheapest figures, they were on the lower end of the list because they just weren't great figures. Iguanas is a prime example of how well done this line truly can be. I think he's probably one of the best Generations core figures that we've seen so far. In regards to bot mode, looking fantastic. I love the fact that they took that almost Pretender shell, updated it to give it its own actual robot mode, and in regards to articulation and just overall design, this guy looks incredible. He's probably one of the most agile and photogenic core class figures that I've so far picked up in the collection, and it's one of the rare instances where I would actually love to see an upscale of this guy. If they were just to take this and upscale it to the deluxe or Voyager price point, add a wrist swivel, this figure would be literally perfect. I think they did a smashing job in regards to the robot mode. With the introduction of this guy, it did allow you to finally combine all 3 of those weapons, which when combined actually look pretty cool. But if I'm to be honest, if given the option between this combined weapon or the null race with Skywarp, I would have chose them night and day. The only downside to this guy once again would be that he is slightly smaller, and I would have loved to have seen him in a larger format, and the bike mode isn't the best, but for a $10 figure, definitely well worth the price point in my opinion. Then we turn to the 4th entry on the list. It had to be given to the Prime Universe Legacy Bulkhead. To me, this was taking a Prime design, stylizing it to match the G1 aesthetic done right. This guy looks awesome, and as an actual figure himself, it is super fun to in fact actually pose around, transform back from robot to truck mode. I think bot mode looks incredible. It definitely takes heavy inspiration from that Prime design with that massive gut, of course the really Prime inspired head sculpt. I love the wrecking ball mace accessory he comes with. I actually really like his energon infused weapon, that being the minigun that attaches onto the shoulder, and just overall the color scheme in the bot mode, it's undeniably Prime Universe Bulkhead. Whereas with RC, I kind of feel she strayed slightly too far away from the Prime design. Bulkhead definitely looks as if though he would be from that universe. I think his alternate mode also is fantastic. That militaristic truck suits the character down to a T, and overall it's really well done. I know there are rumours that they are planning to use this mold for a future version of Optimus Prime, and I'm all for it. I think this is a great looking figure. We'd definitely love to see as to what they could maybe do with an Optimus Prime version. And then we turn to the third spot. Now this guy would have in fact actually been slightly higher up on the list had the next two not been fantastic, so it has got to be given to Dragstrip. Now this guy is a figure of which personally I would not recommend sleeping on at all. For those of you who collected the Studio Series Devastator, you all know how difficult scrap metal, one of the first components that we actually got for that guy, was to obtain after the first few months. And considering this is our first entry into what will no doubt be all 5 of the Stunticons to combine Menasor, I would definitely recommend picking him up. And just as a standalone figure, he's fantastic. The vehicle mode is super awesome, incredibly G1 accurate. I think the robot mode too is wicked. The only downside to him personally, at least for me, would be those shoulder pauldrons. I'm not a huge fan of how they just kind of stick up from the head. I would have much rather had them maybe rotated onto the back. But other than that, by far the best mainline entry of Dragstrip we've ever seen. Robot mode looks great, transformation very simplistic yet very effective, and the combined form will no doubt be super cool once we eventually get that Commander class Motormaster. And then the second spot had to be given to the Kingdom/Legacy Voyager class Blaster. This has got to be one of my most anticipated mainline releases, essentially of all time for the Generations line. I've been going on forever that I would have loved to have seen Hasbro give us an updated version of Blaster, and finally towards the tail end of Kingdom, very early Legacy, they granted me my wish, and my goodness, this figure has turned out so nicely done, even better than the Netflix Soundwave, of which personally I didn't think any other figure could in fact actually top, but Blaster is just so nicely done. Unlike Siege Soundwave, this actually came with one of his minions, that in the form of Eject, so price point wise, you got a lot of bang for your buck. I think as far as the robot mode is concerned, undoubtedly the best mainline Blaster that we've ever seen. I think the bot mode is incredible, leaps and bounds better when in comparison to that Prime Wars Trilogy Leader Class Blaster, which was not only way out of scale, but of course just in terms of design really wasn't the best, to me at least. It was really ruined by that whole Headmaster gimmick. This guy was a true to form G1 version, actually come with his G1 rifle, which I thought was awesome. Articulation was fantastic, paintwork, attention to detail, just overall, as far as robot mode was concerned, it was a smashing figure. And to add even more praise to this guy, the actual boombox is incredible. Probably one of my favourite alternate modes of all time for a Transformers figure. The attention to detail that they actually packed into that, all of the dials, the actual cassette deck, everything about it is just such a fantastic figure. And literally, I would recommend not sleeping on this guy at all. I think come 12 months time, he's going to be super hard to track down, much like Netflix Soundwave and even the Siege Soundwave. I think that figure now is quite difficult to in fact actually pick up. So Blaster, certainly one of the major highlights out of Legacy and of course Kingdom. But the best spot and the top spot had to be given to none other than G2 Leader Class Laser Optimus Prime. This guy literally knocked my socks off after having pretty much reviewed all of the deluxe figures, and whilst half of them were good and half of them weren't, I was so won over when I actually took a look at their G2 Laser Prime. This guy is fantastic, a true to form version of G2 Prime. I think they did a fantastic job, and this is a prime example of how to do a redesign right. This guy took heavy inspiration from his original G2 design, however was just updated to fit the modern, almost War for Cybertron aesthetic, I want to say. They did a fantastic job in updating this guy. The robot mode looks incredible. The shoulders I actually think have turned out really nicely. I know there are some out there that aren't too keen on the fact that they are fixed into place. Personally, I don't really have much of an issue with that at all. I love the gimmick that you can lift up a flap to reveal some Energon missiles actually embedded underneath. I think the accessories are all pretty cool. The Matrix of Leadership embedded within the chest is awesome, and the trailer is so much better when in comparison to the Earthrise Leader. It actually has quite a substantial amount of weight to it. In regards to features, I think it's a lot more enjoyable when in comparison to Earthrise Prime's trailer, and the actual vehicle mode for G2 Laser Prime is fantastic. I've said so many times in my review just how much I love it, and perhaps it's slightly biased as it really does remind me of kind of the Peterbilt semi-truck that the Bayverse Prime acquired, but it's just such an awesome looking truck and such an awesome looking robot mode. If you have to pick one Legacy figure up from the line so far, it has got to be G2 Laser Prime. I think they have done a smashing job. So with all that being said, there was my ranking and overall thoughts on Transformers Legacy so far. As mentioned previously, the first wave was definitely a mixed bag. We got more good figures than we did bad ones, but the bad ones definitely did leave a rather stale taste in my mouth. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you guys agree with my thoughts? Do you think that perhaps Skids and RC, I was a little too harsh on them? As mentioned previously, I just think that in regards to an updated Prime Universe character, Bulkhead does that whole thing so much better. Not only is it a really cool design, but it's also a really fun figure. I just think that RC herself isn't that fun. You know, the accessories are not the best, the design also isn't the best, and as far as Skids is concerned, it truly was the hollowness as well as that block on the back of his head which ultimately ruined that guy for me. But Wave 2 is looking to be cool. I've already reviewed the Legacy Blitzwing and it was a fantastic figure. Another really controversial entry, but trust me, it is a really nice version of that character, and I am looking forward to seeing some of the other Stunticons in Wave 2. I know we're also expecting to see Alita 1, so looking forward to seeing as to how she turns out as well. I thank you guys all so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Legacy and this video down in the comment section below, and until my next video, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.